Should you get an older, more professional camera or a newer, more entry-level camera? I have here the Canon 800D and the Canon 70D, and today we're going to be seeing what's right for you, whether you should invest in an older flagship or a more entry-level, newer camera with newer features like better autofocus. Let's find out in this comparison. Now, just something before we start the video. I just want to say this is a more laid-back video and it's not really based on anything, it's just my opinion. So if you're looking for something more technical or very something that proves it, you might want to go look for a different video. Okay, so there's a bit more to it than you think, because if you pick the older one, you might get an outdated sensor or outdated autofocus, like in this scenario. You have a 20 megapixel sensor in the Canon 7D versus the 24 megapixel sensor in the Canon 800D, and you get the Digic 5 Plus accelerator in the Canon 70D, while you get the Digic 7 accelerator in the Canon 800D. So there's that, but with the Canon 70D you get a lot more features like customizability. For example, you can set your autofocus exactly how you want it to be, unlike what the Canon 800D does, which is it sets all the autofocus preferences just to default. You can't really set it to release without autofocus, without having focus before, or you can't do things like that where you can on the Canon 870D. Now, the ergonomics on the Canon 70D are also a lot better than the 800D, so I think it's a matter of sort of preferences. Sometimes also you'll find a better sensor in the older model, even though, well, not necessarily better sensor, but it's weird because you get the, for example, in this scenario, yeah, the sensor is worse in the older model, but sometimes you'll get a high resolution sensor in the older model, but the low light will be worse, because that's, I think, one of the main things that have improved over the years with cameras. So there's definitely quite a few things involved, rather than just what you think. It's also really confusing, even for me, having tried both of these cameras, since, as well as Canon 1DXs and the Canon R10, I'm honestly not sure what I would pick between them. That has a bigger gap, but these two are a bit closer together. So let me try and pick one and justify my opinion, and then I can try justifying the opinion of the other one, so you can understand which one's better for you. I think that between the 70D and the 800D, I would probably pick the Canon 70D, just because the customizability of the menus and the amount of options it has is a lot better than on the Canon 800D, and the increase in technology, such as the processor or the low light performance, I don't think is significant enough for me to take the 800D over the Canon 70D. However, if I go back to my previous example, between the Canon R10 and the Canon A1DX, the original 1DX, I would probably have to pick the Canon R10. Although, I would probably have to pick the Canon 1DX as well, since that's sensor size bigger, and just the advantage of using full frame lenses is big enough for me. However, if we say take a Canon R8 and compare it to a Canon 1DX Mark II, for example, I would definitely pick the R8 over the 1DX Mark II, because the R8 has better video specs and it has better low light performance and better autofocus, even though the amount of customizability might not be as good in the menus, and it might not survive a torrential downpour like the Canon 1DX Mark II would. So because of that, I would have to pick the Canon R8. Now, let's choose a different shot because I do not like this using one. Now as well, it definitely varies by camera, because if you take the Sony A7 and the Sony A6000, there are major... Excuse me, I'm trying to make a review here. I'll just have to scream over that. Right, the Sony A7 and the Sony A6000. I think definitely big technological advancements were made between those two cameras, such as the improvement of the autofocus system, because in the A7, the original, and even the Mark II, it's really bad compared to the Sony A6000, which almost makes me prefer to buy the Sony A6000, which might not be as good technologically or sensor-wise, or have the variety of lenses, but the improvements in autofocus would be enough to justify getting an A6000 over the A7 and A7 II, which are probably more expensive. That's a bit sketchy. Alright, yep. On the tree now. Now, I do think that you should... It varies by camera, because some brands made big technological advancements in certain ages, and also I think the time between the manufacture of both cameras, like the time between they made the more entry-level model and the more advanced model, that definitely changes things up. For example, if you only shoot using old vintage lenses that are manual focus only, you might want to go for the more premium older model. Although if you are using those, you'll probably be using different cameras, not necessarily newer ones. So there's that as well. But also you want to make sure that you're really... It's a matter of compromises, because every camera has one. And I think that you just need to be able to justify which compromises need to be made. So for example, I can justify that I really need the low light performance as well as the newer autofocus, since I typically shoot large events indoors or with slightly less expensive lenses that might not let in as much light as other lenses. So I would, for example, rather have the Canon R8 over the R6, even though they're the same price, because the readout speed of the Canon R8 makes it a lot easier to use when shooting indoors, and you don't need to really adjust to the light, to the banding of the light, as much as you would need in the Canon R6. So for me, it's worth having a better readout speed over IBIS in this sort of comparison. But for you, it might be a bit different. For you, you might want IBIS or features like that, which might be found better in the older, more premium camera. Some people will take their camera out to the wild and encounter conditions that were never really designed for normal cameras. So you might want an older, more rugged camera that is better weather sealed, for example. Yeah, I think that's about it for this part. Let's jump down and head to my bike so I can do the conclusion then. Alright, quickly the conclusion before it gets completely dark. I mean, the ND filter's already come off and I've slightly bumped the ISO, so we better hurry. I mean, in conclusion, I think that you should get what you need based on the specs of the two cameras you're comparing. But I think you should definitely consider older, more flagship options, since they offer a level of customizability newer, more entry-level models simply can't. I do think that for some cameras, old is gold, while the newer is probably the worst option. But for some other cameras or other scenarios, the newer, more affordable option is definitely the clear choice. Even though the older model might have better features like IBIS. Now in general, what I've seemed to found is that newer models have better low light performance, as well as slightly better autofocus, even though they're more entry-level models. They have better autofocus and better low light performance than the older, more customizable models that might have better build quality, or or more features in general. For example, like I already mentioned, the Canon R6 or the Canon R8. I mean, the Canon R6 has IBIS, but the Canon R8 has a faster readout speed, and that's why I've chose the Canon R8. So I think if you're going to be comparing some cameras, you should definitely not discount the older, more flagship models, and don't be afraid to buy used. You can get a healthy discount buying used, as well as better quality models that way. For example, the Canon R8, if you're going to buy it new, it would be roughly 2,000, 2,500. You can get the R6 Mark II for 2,000 or 2,500 used. So definitely, I think it's worth buying used, especially if you're buying from a reputable source. Now, you just need to go out, find your camera, compare the specs, see what you value more in the camera and what you can compromise or get rid of, and decide between those two cameras. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Let me know if this video format works well or not, because it's definitely more casual and I'm not sure if it looks good or if it works at all. So I think I'm out of the frame now. Anyway, cut.